right, this is my one slide. I really did want this to be a birds of a feather session, so I'm really glad we got a nice cozy room to talk. I think this will be interesting. Hopefully people with microphones have some good running shoes on. So I have spent many years working with vulnerability data, just to set the stage here. And so not only just direct CVE data, but like from CVE.org, but from NVD and all of the enrichment sources, all of the supplemental sources, so on and so forth. And there are some, let's use the word challenges with consuming vulnerability data. And I've started to get involved with like the CVE working groups to try and help communicate some of those challenges and hopefully to alleviate and improve. But one of the things that we generally struggle with as we're trying to help people through the CVE program to consume this data is actually connecting with consumers, to actually talk with other people. I've got my opinions, and I will try to inject those when necessary, but largely to connect with other people and to talk about the pain points that people are experiencing. And so just as a show of hands, just real quick, how many people are ingesting CVE.org data? Awesome. This might be a really good discussion then. NVD? Okay, great. That's a great start. I mean, this is vulnerability data. But of course, there's a ton of other sources. There's OSV, the GitHub advisories, JP-certs, and NVD, so on and so forth. There's all these other sources, and there's all these different enrichment sources. And so these, I put on the slides basically questions off the top of my head. I put, as you can tell, an enormous quantity of time into my slide work. And so I just want to kick things off and just like we can go in any direction here. We could start at the top and work down. Does anybody have a preference? No? All right, let's start with like where are your pain points? Where do people mainly struggle? Like where's the biggest problem? Is it with the data format? Like parsing XML versus JSON. A lot of the CVE data used to be in XML, and now it's in JSON, which was, in my opinion, a wonderful change. But do people struggle with that type of thing? Is that a challenge for anyone? Anyone a head nod? Anything? Having a good time parsing CVE data? No. And why is that? Having a bad time? I'm putting someone on the spot for those remote.
I'm trying to think of my experiences, but so my technology is Bash and JQ, which I realize does not meet this shouldn't allow me in the room perfect. Probably.
No, it's great.
And Stack Overflow. But I have a lot of error checking, like is the field filled out or not? Or is the CWE character I expected, are those characters here or in the other field nearby? Is the date missing that's supposed to be there? There's an array inside of an array of a thing. So those are my very rough struggles. And it's, you learn, but they're more like ifs and loops and arrays than I would expect in parsing data.
And do you have that, for lack of a better term, a lot of those are just one-offs?
They might be, but they're one-offs that I leave my checking in place, right? Because I don't know when they're going to come back. Some got fixed, some didn't.
Right. Like I know in the CVE records, when you go in the affected section and you go for vendors and what is it, version or something, like it's NA, there's like, I don't know, a few 10,000s of records with NA. So like, I know for me, like I write a one-off saying, hey, if the product says NA, just remove that and actually make it a missing field, not text N/A. So. Yeah, and so that you were saying that other people do parse data. Does anybody else have a favorite tool? Or like Art was saying how he uses JQ and Bash to get at this data? Yes, sir.
So my company we have an entire analytics team. They use a lot of Splunk stuff for a lot of our reporting. So we'll take a lot of these the data in from like a CVE, and it's good. Do we store it locally? Yeah, but we also override it because we do want to get those updates. Because again, sometimes your score changes, your EPSS score can change, and a lot of it just boils down to how do we use it? How do we use it to prioritize? There's 11 billion CVEs around there, and some of them are old, and we find new stuff too. So taking that and pairing with a lot of our vulnerability scanners, we're very often a secondary consumer of the CVE data also because they do their weighting. And because we have so many different scanning tools, we need to have some way to normalize everything. And that's why my analytics team gets paid a whole lot of money. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting actually to talk about normalizing across all of the data sources, like if we take something like CVSS to normalize, and I don't want to get away from the tool discussion real quick because you mentioned Splunk and I want to come back to that, but something like CVSS where you may get like the primary CVE record, the CNA will put CVSS in there, and then you get NVD adding their version, and then you go find that your vendor, your tool vendor, the scanner has its own CVSS version in there, something like that, and or none of them match, and you've got that challenge, right? Has anybody solved that? And it was like, I figured it out.
So there are just some,
Yep.
yeah, there are
You
some
can
pain
go on.
points mentioned in the Discord. MyTrade does not enforce any CNA rules, does no QA on the submissions, and CVE descriptions are often pathetic. If not coming from the big vendors.
Yep. So just to talk to that, there are some checks, and clearly there's a challenge with data quality. So yeah, I mean, that person is true. I mean, like there's a lot of the stuff is completely free text. And that's something, it's sort of a double-sided coin though, because like if the intake process became more difficult and more onerous, then maybe CNAs would be less likely to participate. But I agree. I mean, like we need at least a higher level of minimum quality in here. And I think, so for people working with data, and there's a question here in the middle, but one of the rules for like data scientists is that the 80-20 rule applies, where you spend 80% of your time cleaning data and the other 20% complaining about the data. So that's the 80-20 rule. But was there a follow-up?
But maybe before on that same note, Jay. So I think that talk earlier by Chris and Alec also mentioned that when you have imperfect data, one of the ways that they circumvented it is by enriching it after the fact. But the root cause maybe is again in the input. So and there are the CNA rules, and I think maybe Art can talk to that. But there are, as the Discord guy mentioned or girl, that they're not enforced. So the question is, and I understand there's probably a balance between you don't want to make the too strict, the process too strict so that people won't submit vulnerabilities. But maybe there is a fine line that can be met, and rejecting a submission that has missing data to improve the input.
Right. Yeah. So first, saying that there are checks in place and those checks do run, I do think that that they can be raised up in quality. Yeah.
Hi. To me, I think my biggest problem has been keeping up with updates, because most of the time we see vulnerabilities that maybe are medium severity and we say, okay, we'll deal with them later. And then 2 weeks later, they are now actively exploited. They've escalated to a critical, and it's very hard to keep up with those to like get a notification, get a updated feed of updates, if that makes sense. Because the only way we found out is query it again and see if it changed and compare it manually. But if there's 10,000 vulnerabilities, well, you gotta query 10,000 times, right?
Yeah. Do you have any solution to that? So like things do update and the world does change. We do have to prepare for that. Do you have any solutions in place, or you just check the data?
Our solution has been relying on vendors that have this like thread feeds and try to aggregate data from other sources that track active exploits.
Yep.
And periodically checking back, specifically, I'm going to call out like Cisco, Microsoft, like those big vendors, like checking
Yeah.
if they have updated their previous month releases and see if there's anything that concerns us, right? But
Right.
we haven't found a solution that is able to, let's say, notify us or have an easy way to just check what changed in the last month.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, I wouldn't quite call it a failing of like the data. I think that this is a state of the world, that things update and we have to change our priorities daily. And I think we have some opportunity to improve how we're doing that. Would be the correct way to say that. There's some questions up front here too. Yeah, back here.
So I think our biggest problem has not been so much with the data formatting, so much as the data accuracy, and the shift of the format over time leads to questions in the accuracy. So for example, say you have a CVE that applies to multiple configurations. The meaning of that seems to have changed over time. So you almost have to have a physical, an expert read the description of the CVE to understand what those multiple configurations even mean.
Right.
If they should be running on with, but they just happen to list 2 configurations instead, things like that. And additionally, the switch from version ranges to, specified versions, that changeover has not been entirely accurate as well. And I don't know of an additional source of information. If there's, we primarily go to NVD straight for our data. So I don't know if MITRE has an additional source of information that corrects for any of that kind of accuracy issue.
Yeah. So real quick, I know that MITRE has or CVE.org has the process. They've updated the schema already for the NVD CPE format. Yeah, that was 5.1.1 version, which was just a month or 2 ago. And so part of the challenge is like, we updated. And so when in the NVD schema, when CPE is defined, it's kind of a nice way that it's defined in there. And now the CVE.org data also does that for CPE data, although it's a little bit less complete in there. But yes, I think data quality like that is a huge challenge. And I think one of the ways that I could see improving this moving forward is that if consumers like this, we had more of a voice, and if we had like a consumer union that we could, help out and provide feedback and say, this is a really important thing to us. And actually, one of the things that I hope to get out of here, the last bullet point on my slide, is how could a group like CV.org reach out? For those who don't know, the Quality Working Group has a GitHub repo where we've got issues open there. Anybody can open an issue, and there are 70 open right now. And we're considering a lot of upcoming changes. And one of the things that would be really cool is if people could either get notified or could respond to, I don't know, a survey or somehow provide input of like, why are you guys considering that change? That's stupid. Do this instead. Have that consumer feel to say like, hey, we've worked with this data and what you're saying is a terrible idea. Do this instead. Or what a great idea. I would support that 100%, because that's one of the things I think that's been lacking in the past, that there's changes made because they seemed good to a select group of people with their own motivations and jobs and things like that. And that consumer perspective was somewhat lacking. And so I think as consumers, hopefully we can make our voices heard. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas on how consumers can get their voices heard. Yes, Ben, you got a quick question?
So I just wanted to say on the change thing, NVD does have a change log. It is incredibly hard to resolve. So like, even though it's there, it's hard to kind of integrate that into your library. The CVE.org also, the CVE list is also in GitHub, but resolving GitHub diffs into a JSON file is also not the easiest thing in the world. So a simpler way for a feed of changes, I think, would be a really positive.
Yeah.
The other thing that I struggle with is I spend most of my time taking nested arrayed data and making it flat. Because
Yes.
that's how I do analysis. That's how folks do visualization. And so rather than running JQ after JQ after JQ, I'd rather just have a flat file that I can work with.
Right.
I don't know if a pipeline to output flat files would be
Nope.
okay. But that would be my suggestion. That would be what I would hope for, is some
Yes.
flat file pipeline.
All right. So Ben is going to open a new issue on our repo, Chris, for flat files. I mean, I've got code to do that, Ben. Yeah, me too. Right. Yeah. So it's a challenge. Did you have a question that you wanted to, or addition? Someone back there?
Yeah, I want to go ahead and answer part of your question about how do we get consumers in here. One of the considerations I have for next year is to bring in some very large customer types for a day or two to actually help elicit what they want, what they need,
Right.
and how we do that. So if you have thoughts along those lines, I'd like to hear more about that and put that in there.
Great.
What's that?
Yeah.
There's a few more that are very big, but
Yeah.
I'll talk with you on that one. Okay.
We have a question back here still.
Okay.
In order for me to get the actual MVD data, and it's not alone on some of these data feeds, to backfill this, like I've got to iterate through the APIs. And there used to be a legacy 1.1 data feed where I could
Yeah.
just pop it down in one file.
Yeah.
2.0 and above, and some of these data feeds, like I don't have a way to just dump all the data and then start my deltas.
Yep.
It would be nice if that was, there, because I've got a lot of systems that I need to backfill, and
Yeah.
I keep doing the same work over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I don't have anything to add to that. That would be cool. I would
that
also
would be
appreciate.
fantastic. And then the question I wanted to ask you is mapping between the vulnerabilities and threat intelligence in that threat landscape. I'm curious, if you've approached it, your thoughts on that topic. It kind of seems to be the next evolution of vulnerability management.
Yeah. When you say,
What are the bad guys doing?
what is the bad guy doing? Was that the last part you said? Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if everybody knows this. I help run EPSS, and we score things daily like that. And to track what the bad guys are doing, we made a concession that we're only going to look for CVEs for that reason. Because if we go look at threat intel and you get, depending on the vendor, depending on the source, you get 15 different names from 14 vendors, it's really challenging. So I think one of the things that I want to do with EPSS, and I think in general, is we have to support the process. Even if we think CVEs are broken or nasty or ugly, whatever it is, let's support that and make it better. And therefore, a year from now, hopefully, or 2 or 5 years from now, we're going to be in a better place where we're going to be able to find more about what the bad guy's doing because we're tracking those IDs. And so that was my quick rant. So yeah, up here.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, so it's funny, all the talks about this, because I've been meaning actually to bring it up in the QWG as a potential solution for some of this. And I wasn't sure how many people also are all doing the same thing, but it sounds like everybody who's consuming this data has their own bespoke processes for normalizing and flattening, pulling out the same stuff. And it's all probably pretty similar until at least, a few forks in the road. And like for me, the biggest data problems is, kind of the signal versus noise. You kind of have to consume everything and then pare down. And then there's also just the frequency, the updates, and even just the model of polling, right? Yeah, like reading GitHub diffs or, manually managing your own. And so I like that you invited someone to open an issue. I am going to open an issue today on it.
Yeah.
But I do think when I think of this and when I first joined the quality group, like the most simplistic solution seems to be something that flips the model instead of having to necessarily like overtly poll, especially from like a repo or scanning. All of it is to doing some sort of event stream, right? Yeah. Something that people can consume, as information comes along and kick off whatever process they specifically need.
Yeah.
And so,
And I might even push for an and of that. Like you've got this and that and.
Yeah. One of many options, right? But if we can start to funnel things down so that specific events, come along and they kick off our process and we can enrich it, I think
Yeah.
that'll make a lot less duplication and a lot more open
Yep.
sharing of this information.
And the beginning part of your statement too, talking about the challenges in the volume and the signal to noise ratio. And in my mind, like I sort of want all of that noise. Initially, like I want that floodgate opened and then through different techniques, I'm going to whittle down to the signal. But like, I don't want anybody to decide for me what is signal versus noise, which is always a challenge in data. You get people like, I'm going to be helpful and clean this up for them, and they drop like half the important fields. So yeah, I like sort of that fire hose coming in, and as in my data collection, I accept that. And I'm like, yes, these are floodgates. They're coming in. I need to deal with it. Disk is cheap. Throw it in there. So.
Hi,
Yes,
Bob
sir.
Lord from CISA. First of all, thank you for organizing this. I think this is these BOFs can be incredibly productive, so thank you for that. And then, I want to go back and echo and amplify and plus one some of the things that you were saying and some of the other folks were saying. So I think of the CVE program as a product. And so the product needs to have some customers. When I start looking at this, I see first order customers, which are usually tools, and they're also researchers like yourselves and Ben and many others. And so that's one customer, and I think we need to get much more rigorous about how we talk and think about that. And then I also think about the downstream customers, and putting my old CISO hat back on, I was one of those customers. There are millions, literally millions, of organizations and individuals who want to reduce their risk. And today, by the way, spoiler alert, so I help run the Secure by Design program at CISA, so this will be my shtick. There are too many vulnerabilities for us to patch, and so we have to come up with some sort of way of coping with all this unsafe software. When you go back and take a look at what product managers do, really good product managers, they become obsessive. Like they'll say the word obsessive with the customer, understanding what the customer's problems are, and they can be a weird bunch, to be honest. I mean, I guess we're a weird bunch in our own way, but really good product managers are obsessive about talking to the customers. So I guess my question, more of a seed to plant with you, but maybe you have an idea. How do we not just get a couple of customers once a year? How do we get 5 customer interviews per week, every week, and try to figure out what are the common problems? Because I think the problems that we predict that they'll have are often going to be very different. I did this twice with CISOs from major companies last week. The things they told me they didn't like about the CVE program are not the things we've been arguing about. And so I think we just have a great opportunity to become good product managers and to think much more about what those downstream customers and their customers are running into. So I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that, but I'd love to continue the dialogue.
I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. But we do have like 3 minutes left, 2 or 3 minutes, and solve it. I think an important thing in the last 2 minutes, how do we continue this? How can we all keep talking? How do we reach the people that aren't here that, like Bob was talking about, that have stuff to contribute? Does anybody have any ideas, like a mailing list, Slack, a LinkedIn group, GitHub issues? There is the quality working group, which would be the primary target to take some of this consumer feedback. Definitely, I think, if people are interested, I don't want to say join because I don't know what the official process is for joining, but there's definitely the GitHub repos. There's discussions there. Anything that you have there. Also, just reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect and talk more about this. But I think it'd be really cool if we did have some way to continue this discussion, to talk about what you all would want and what I see too, and how do these line up? So, anyone have any other last closing thoughts? I think we're at time.
There was a lot of good discussion in the Discord channel.
Oh, good. I'll have to go look at that.
And I think we have lunch on the other side of this.
All right.
So maybe if anybody has
stop talking.
questions, they can talk to you then.
All right. Thanks, everyone.